Upset alert meter. How concerned am I about some of these favorites? NC State plays Tennessee. This is in Charlotte, so it's a neutral site game. I expect Tennessee to be well represented here, according to our sources inside the secondary ticket market world. Tennessee about a 9.5-point favorite right now at FanDuel. All right, I am thinking to myself as I'm walking around Centennial Park today in Nashville, getting a mild sunburn in the process. I'm thinking, I love Tennessee this week. That's my chest I'm patting. I love Tennessee this week. But how would it go wrong if it went wrong? How concerned am I? Well, I'm about a 6 on the concern meter because I walked around that park today and I worked up a scenario in my head where NC State doesn't just cover, NC State wins outright. I've got a ton of respect for Tony Gibson. I've got a ton of respect for the NC State defensive support staff. We've got them really, really highly graded. I talked to you about that last week. I talked to you about that Tuesday night. Josh Heupel is one of the top 5 OCs in the country. Tony Gibson's way up there on the defensive side. These two support staffs going against each other, it's big league stuff, and I want you to think about where Nico Iamaleava falls in all this. So he's not becoming a star. To me, he's a star right now, but he's still young. He's still green. He hasn't started a lot of games. So sometimes you and I watch a guy go off, and we think in highlight terms, and we think this guy looks invincible, but that's not always what opposing defensive coaches see on film. So I view this NC State defensive staff as about as equipped as any staff they're going to face outside of like Georgia, a little bit down the road, of being able to expose potential flaws in Nico's game. Now, it may be that they're wrong and they think they've got something and it's not there. But what do you do against young guys? The young quarterbacks out there, the ones who are lighting up the stat sheet. One of the first things you got to find out about these dudes is how well do they stand up against pressure? And so NC State, fairly aggressive defensively anyway, just their overall profile is that I really expect them to be aggressive. Now, the trade-off there, and the reason everyone doesn't do it every down, is because you can get burned doing that. But I think NC State has to do that. It's a massive moment for the program, too. It is a massive moment. This is a game for Tennessee. It's the game for NC State. So if you get him rattled early, and that Tennessee run game is not just boom, 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 the way Josh Heupel wants it to, then you start asking, well, okay, at that point, we start to ask, what's the weakness over on Tennessee's side of things? And perceptionally, it's the secondary, which coincides and it meshes very well with the moves that NC State made in the portal and probably the overall strength of that offense and a veteran quarterback in Grayson McCall throwing to him, and that's the wide receiver core. If they can start to tilt the game in their favor, they wouldn't be totally uncomfortable in a track meet, but if they can tilt the game in their favor, there is a world, regret it though I might, there is a world where NC State wins this game outright. There's a reason this number's not 17 or 18. It's 9.5. Now, it's gone up this week. I like Tennessee, but I've got a 6 on the concern meter for upset. Moving along, a game I'll be at. Yes, Colin, the whole new Saturday tour will be taking ourselves up to Ann Arbor, as is everyone else this weekend. There's the beautiful graphic. We are proudly fueled on the road by our friends at Quick Trip. Texas is still a 7.5-point favorite in this game over at FanDuel. You notice how many 7.5s there are floating out there? Producer Jesse and I were looking at this earlier today. So Tennessee was a 7.5 favorite. They've bumped up to 9.5. But Texas over Michigan, 7.5. We're going to do Oklahoma State, Arkansas a little bit later. Oklahoma State, 7.5. Jesse, what are the other two we looked at? I don't know, there are a couple other 7.5s out there. So there are a lot of these names, or a lot of these, Nebraska, Colorado, 7.5. So there are a lot of these 7.5 just kind of floating out there, consensus across the market. And I know that your instinct is telling you that number looks low, but history is saying if it looks too low, if it looks too good to be true, you know the rest there. Is this too good to be true? I cannot think off the top of my head of a single person I've heard outside Michigan fandom pick Michigan to win this game this week. I've heard very few people pick them to cover. That includes me. I took Texas to win. I took Texas to cover. I think Texas matches up very well with Michigan. I think Michigan's going to struggle to score, which is not surprising, but that means they just turn it into a fist fight. But where I differ from a lot of folks is I think Texas ought to be well equipped to win that way as well. I think Texas has built themselves to do that. You get enamored with the flash and the sizzle, and there should be a whole lot of confidence in that outfit that they can win a physical game. But if they didn't, how would it happen? And what is my concern level here? My concern level is only a 5. I feel good about Texas, but if Texas can't run the ball well, and Michigan's been known to do that, then the Texas offense has to rely on Quinn Ewers and a really deep stable of pass catchers. And the thing about that is, I've stood on the sideline 3 years in a row and watched Ohio State try the same thing against this Michigan defense, and it's failed 3 times in a row. And that, in some cases, unstoppable-looking offense got stopped 3 years in a row. So there's a world where Michigan does that. Here's the difference. Those Michigan teams were more offensively efficient than I think this Michigan team will be, which is where my concern level goes down. I could certainly see Texas getting their nose bloodied. I could see Texas maybe disappointing me a little bit and not being able to match the physicality. What I have trouble seeing is Michigan scoring enough to make it matter when they give themselves the opportunity. If I'm wrong there, I'm wrong there. But that's why my concern level is a little bit lower. And like I said, the most fascinating thing to me in this game is, number one, can Michigan score offensively? Defensive scores you can't predict. They're really good at it, but no one has a model that predicts that. But the second part is, if it's 7-3 midway through the second quarter, you know Michigan has gotten the game out into the deeper water where they want it. So then can they score enough? But the other thing is, does Texas look uncomfortable there? The implied total in this game, Texas by about a touchdown, and the total in the low 40s is like a 25-17 final. That's the implied total from the odds makers, which means if this thing's played in the upper teens, low 20s, Michigan feels okay. I just think Texas should as well. Maybe I'm wrong there. Kansas State is on the road. Do you know this? If you're a Wildcat fan, do you know where your team is a couple of nights from now? Well, it's an early game, but they're at Tulane. Kansas State's a 9.5-point favorite at FanDuel right now at Tulane. It's a noon kickoff Eastern time, so it's 11 a.m. local time kick there in New Orleans. Kansas State did lose 3 games on the road last year. I'm going to say against better competition, but Tulane is not a bad team. Tulane's been one of the best G5 outfits for a while, and they got John Summerall from Troy. Now, you may not know who Summerall is right now. You will, all due respect to Tulane, because he'll be coaching a major Power 4 program in the very near future. If you want to buy stock in one of these guys, John Summerall is the guy. There is a big points per game differential gap for Kansas State in home games versus road games. It's always harder to play in college football on the road, so a lot of teams have that in common. It may be just a tick more glaring for Kansas State, and a lot of that's situational too. Sometimes it just so happens that you play better teams on the road, because this is just over a couple of years stretch. Tulane is good enough talent-wise to hang here. They are. This coaching staff's very good. It's a very underrated coaching staff because no one knows anything about them. These G5 coaches who are ascending, their profile is ascending, they always circle these moments because they know they don't get a lot of them. And it's always, fair or not, the games they're judged on. And they're like inferior from a talent profile standpoint, so they got to punch above their weight. But Tulane has a 2-day rest advantage here as well. It doesn't matter as much early in the season, but we do pay attention to it. My concern level here is a 6. I respect that team that much. My concern level is a 6 for Kansas State, favored by 9.5. Now, the next game, we have placed money on. App State at Clemson. This line has come down since we bet it. We got it at App State plus 17.5. They are now a 17-point dog on the road at Clemson. Now, listen, I'm not calling for the outright. So my concern level, albeit a 4, is not as high as some of these other games. Clemson's favored for a reason. It's a night game there. It's what we would call a get-right game, but I'm terrified to say that after what Florida State had happen to him the other night. So if this were to be a really close game in the fourth quarter, it would just be because Clemson's offense has done more of the same, and that is be really, really mediocre at best. Now, Cade Klubnik's been a lot better quarterback at home than on the road. A lot of college quarterbacks have that said about him. Again, like I said with Kansas State, it's just a little bit more glaring with the Clemson quarterback here. Low-scoring game, if we get one, provides a ton of variance. That means every possession matters more. That means every turnover gets magnified. Joey Aguilar is about a 300-yard-per-game passer for App State. Look, there is a world where we watch this game and we end up saying, I think App State had the better quarterback. Klubnik's just been a disappointment. The Clemson offense, for a while now, has been a disappointment. And if it happens again, App State can hang with them. Beating them would be a tall task, but they can hang with them. This is the same quarterback that I sat right there in Austin International Airport last year and watched beat Texas A&M. It's the same one. A lot of these pieces on this App State team went to Kyle Field last year, and you may say, well, big deal. I mean, that was Jimbo on his way out. That was a Texas A&M team. Okay. If you think 2024 Clemson's better than 2023 A&M, okay, I do too. That's great. For broad strokes purposes, there is a big game profile about this App State program, not because of the Michigan win 15 decades ago, but because there are players on this team that have gone on the road and drawn blood from a major Power 5 opponent. Sometimes when you get that in your DNA, it doesn't really leave, and you're more comfortable in the moment. So my concern level's a 4, but I think it bears close watching, and we love App State plus the points. Now, the last one we have not talked about all week, but I will hit right now. Kansas is thought to be one of the contenders in the Big 12, which they are. They're on the road at Illinois. Haven't heard anyone, maybe short of Tom Fornelli, talk about this game all week, and I just assume Fornelli did. Kansas is favored by 5.5 at FanDuel right now. My concern level is a 7. I think Illinois can pull this off. I think we may have been a year too early on Illinois. It was kind of trendy to buy into them last year, and I think a lot of folks may have been just a year too early. Luke Altmaier in his last 4 games, 70% completion guy, 11-2 touchdown to interception ratio. Illinois defense last week, albeit against pretty inferior competition, forced either a 3-and-out or a turnover on every possession in the first half. And it is a brand new year with a lot of new pieces for Kansas. There is a very distinct possibility that Kansas is on its way to becoming, for all we know, a Big 10 champion or Big 12 championship contender. But in that world, there exists a scenario where they are not yet what they will become, because it's college football, because this is a developmental program, and therefore it's not just blindly reloading like it would be at Georgia or Ohio State or what have you. So my concern level is a 7 here. I think there's a very, very real possibility that Illinois is in this thing at the end, which is implied in the point spread. I think they can win the thing outright. So those are some of the upset alert concern meters I have.